Greetings and welcome back to the GM Academy Workshop. Of course, I am Jim McClure. I will be your host here for our next installment within the workshop series. Today's topic is going to be an interesting one, a little bit different. In the past sort of 6, 7, 8 weeks, I forget how long we've been doing this now, but we've been pretty focused on sort of very specific things. We've been focused on dealing with plot. We've been focused on dealing with designing combat encounters. We've been doing everything like that. And now we're going to get a lot more focused on sort of, actually I should say, not focused, on tips, tricks, and things of that nature here at the table. But first, I would like to go ahead and go around and do a quick round table here and introduce our various people. Let's start over here with Patrick. Let's get your introduction. Just name, a little bit about yourself, how long you've been DMing, etc.
Yes, I've been playing tabletop games for about 7 years now, and DMing for the past 2 or 3 of which. And overall, I play a large variety of systems, largely focused on narrative games.
Okay, wonderful. Next up we got here on the panel is Simon.
Yeah, my name is Simon. I've been role-playing for, well, a decade, for 10 to 12 years. I've been dungeon mastering for just 1 to 1.5 years now, so I'm relatively new to it, I guess.
Okay, wonderful. And then finally we've got Steven. Do we have you here on the audio with us?
Yes, I do. I have audio.
Yeah, and if we get a quick introduction from you.
Yeah, I started playing Tabletop around 4 years ago, and then I started GMing about 3 years ago. Mostly D&D 3.5, but I've also done some other systems. I especially enjoy running Call of Cthulhu once in a while. That usually tends to be single scenarios though, because it lends itself pretty well to getting people killed. So, yeah, but that's about it for me, I think.
Okay, fair enough. Wonderful. So that's our panel here this evening. And like I said, our topic is a little bit different in the regards of what we're actually going to be talking about is not necessarily one topic or one big topic or like plot that we've spent seemingly forever on and we're going to be spending even more time on, but a bunch of smaller topics. And we're sort of calling this event Jim's Toolbox, as it were, which is these are a bunch of sort of smaller different advice, tips, and tricks, things like that I've accumulated over the years for running tabletop games, and these sort of vary the whole gambit of different things. You know, I kind of want to just start this out by saying, you know, these are tricks and things that I have found that works for me. I always seem to start these videos with a disclaimer. These aren't going to work for everyone. Some people are going to disagree with why I use them, but I want to present them in a way because there are certain things that I do differently than some other GMs. The one that we'll get into specifically is when we're talking about dealing with, say, music in a campaign. I have a very specific way that I do background music to get a specific result. So again, as I always like to say, these are just tips and tricks that I have found that work for me, that not necessarily work for everyone else. And of course, we will get some other great examples from the panel as well. So let's go ahead and just jump on into this here. One of the first big things that I like doing, it's a fun little event, and people on different sides are on different sides of this discussion, and that is rolling dice as a DM. Some people like to do it behind the screen. Some people like to do it out in front for everyone to see. And there's different merits of going either direction. If you're rolling your dice behind the screen, ultimately, or if you're using like a Roll20 or an internet platform, rolling it as a secret roll, what you will notice is, of course, you have the ability to change the dice rolls. I'm sure no DM, including myself, has ever changed the outcome of a dice roll. But it gives you the ability to do that. It gives you the ability for them not always to know when you're rolling. If you roll on something, I actually can keep a computer mouse pad behind, because when you roll on that, if I'm doing a face-to-face campaign, you don't hear me rolling if I do a check for something involved in it. So there are advantages to rolling behind the screen. On the flip side, there's an advantage of rolling in front of the screen, and that is when you're rolling for all the players to see, they know that what pops up is law. It's God. It's everything that exists that's the result, and there's no fudging it, there's no changing it. So it gives a bit of a different feel to it. So ultimately, those are sort of the two different aspects of rolling in front of players or not rolling in front of players. Now, that's not my little trick or what have you. What mine is when I use each one. And I do it for a very specific desired effect. What I personally do, I roll behind the screen. I want to be able to adjust dice rolls as I need it. That's one of the things for heavy narrative play, especially with the high lethal systems I run, like Legend of the Five Rings, that is sometimes needed. But what I do is when the players have, we get to that oh crap moment of they've done messed up. And many GMs who play for a long time know this moment. It's when they walk into the king's throne room and they suspect the king's a villain, and the archer decides to draw his arrow back and let loose at the king in a room full of his guards. Clearly, they've done messed up. They should know they've messed up, but they've done messed up. And at that time, what I do as a DM is I go, GM screen over here, whatever the dice say or what you get. And at that point, then I open up the roll. It's you have now messed with the fates that were the system as it's supposed to be. Now you're going to get what the fates give you. And what this does is sort of a twofold thing. Of one, it enforces the fact of, and I'll say I don't do this just to be a vengeful DM. By all means, I'm not a vengeful DM. I rarely kill off players. But players will eventually, especially as they get more comfortable with you, or if they're not very comfortable with you, have this habit of going sort of loose cannon and will do things that are not in the best interest of their players, especially if they're expecting you to save them in some kind of way. What this little trick does of opening up the rolls in front of them is, it's an initial, just clear acknowledgement you have done something that you shouldn't have done. The GM who normally tries to save you is no longer doing that. He's gone. He's left the building. Now you're dealing with the fates that you messed with. And I actually take it as far, especially when I play L5R games where everything's really based on the character sheet. I lay out the character sheet. I go, here's what they've got. Here's their skill rolls. I'm fighting them just like you're fighting them. It's to the death, and what the dice roll, you decided to mess with this, you've brought it on yourself. So aside from sort of giving that distinct difference, we have changed the dynamic here. It becomes 100% fair. I didn't kill you off because you attacked the king. You should have known you didn't attack the king. Here are the mechanics that are the king. Here's the combat that's going to ensue. I hope you survive. I'm rooting for you. Go for it. But it's one of the tricks I do, and it has worked to great success in the past because my players know when my dice come out from behind the table, we are in a serious moment. Their characters are legitimately at risk of death when I am rolling in front of them. So while each rolling in front of them or rolling not in front of them has their pros and cons, what I personally do is a little bit of both with a very intentioned method of going, when I'm doing this, you're in trouble. Be prepared. Play your best. So that's one of my first little tricks here. Let's see, get into another one, and I sort of teased this at the beginning, and we'll go ahead and get into it now. Music. Music is a very common thing, of course, that a lot of people do. They play background music at tabletop, and it really engages that sensation type of fun that we've talked about in other play sessions. You know, you get the music, you get into it, and me personally, I really, really get into music. My sensation rating is actually pretty low, but there's two things that I really, really get into, and that's music and rolling dice. I love rolling physical dice, too. I didn't say that before. And I have sort of interesting taste in music in that no matter what it's at the table, if I want to motivate myself, then I'm either listening to modern pop music, 80s metal, gotta love my Metallica, or if no one's had the pleasure of listening to pirate metal, I cannot recommend that genre enough. Ailstorm is one of the greatest bands out there. But anyway, my personal tastes aside, having the proper setting music can do a number to get your players really engaged, to get that sensation play, even to get that fantasy engagement of it gets them into the world with the proper background music. Having said that, I don't use music regularly. I use music in very specific times. I use it to emphasize a point, just like what I did with the setting the GM screen aside and rolling dice in front of everyone. I use that to make a point. I do the same thing with music. I use music almost exclusively for my finale scenes. Players will get to the table, we'll be playing through, and all of a sudden music will start to go in the background. And what I'll start hearing from players is, oh, it's just about to get serious. Because to a degree, I've trained them to expect that, but it adds that extra level. It adds that sensation engagement. It adds something that they're not getting the rest of the time to the table and makes that finale that much more special. And it makes it special because it's absent in the rest of the game. And like I said at the beginning, there's nothing wrong with using music throughout it, but what I found is when I just use it for the finales, it has more effect than it does if I use it through the entire campaign. I can really punctuate that point using the music and using the proper set pieces. And then if I really want to annoy my players, I just play either my Hailstorm Pirate Metal and then switch them up to Lady Gaga and really confuse them. But it's always, I use it, and honestly, when I use music, Roll20 has a great app. If anyone who's listening to this game's on Roll20, their little jukebox app, as far as finding background music, that is phenomenally wonderful. Obviously, there's a lot of other sites and systems, but I use that to wonderful effect. So going to our panel here, I know a lot of people use music here. We'll start with Simon. What kind of ways have you used music in the past, or do you use music in your games?
Yes, I use music in my games. I have used it most of the time for battle encounters to just set the tone of the encounter, what it is like. So if they fight in a bar, it would be like bar music in the background, maybe people talking. And if it would be on the battlefield, there's like more this, I don't know, like Braveheart music, kind of where some swords are clinging. So it gives a bit of ambience or a feel of ambience to the players. I actually really like the idea of just playing music to special, or playing music at special events, final encounters.
Let me ask you. Actually, because it almost sounds like you do a similar thing, just different to me. Do you play it regularly on the background, or you just play it once you get into an encounter, whether it be combat, social, what have you?
It is kind of the cue to roll initiative, I guess.
Okay, and I like that. Again, it's similar to what I do. I use it in a smaller scale, but that's a good system as well, because like you said, it's sort of you isolate off that section through music, and I think that's a good appropriate use. So, again, some people play it throughout the whole time, but I just, again, as a tips and trick, that's one of the ways I specifically use music. I use it to punctuate my finales. Okay, so moving on from music, because we have a bunch of these to get through here today, we're gonna go to another trick. This is one I picked up. Actually, a fair amount of DMs, I believe, do this, and it's so necessary for campaigns, especially if you're gonna run a sandbox style, and that is I keep a written list of random names. Sits next to me on a legal pad. I have it for everything. I have it for different races. If I'm doing L5R, I have it for my different clan names. I've got a list of Kakita names. I've got a list of Bayushi names. What have you. I have a random list of town names. I have a random list of tavern names. Because inevitably, what's going to happen is my PCs are going to be sitting there, and they're going to want to go to the library. And they're going to explore the library, and I have my library all planned out. And then they're going to want some help finding a book, and I have my old library keeper that has that. And they're going to make friends with him, and they're going to go back and have dinner with him, and then they're going to want to know what his wife and kids' name are. And then I'm going to be sitting there going, it's such and such from such and such. It breaks that immersion. To have a list of random names, they ask me, and I just look down and I go, oh, look, it's Garby. That's his child's name is Garby, because I just have that prepared. And actually, I'll tell you the funny story. Garby actually started out with the typical, my people were going to a town, met the sort of the two town guards out front, talked to the one town guard had a name, and for some reason they just didn't like him. So they decided they wanted to talk to the other guard and ask him what the name was. So I was like, I don't know, it's Guard B. And then that got shooting to Garby. And ever since then, I have kept a nice long list of names, and it is really useful because names are incredibly powerful within the human psyche. We really identify and understand names, and we treat somehow names sit special within our minds. And this actually sort of leads me into my next point and one of my next little tricks that I like to do. If you want to just have a nice, subtle way of making players hate an NPC or hate a villain, have them mispronounce their name, not remember their name, anything involving the name. Give them an unflattering nickname. They will hate that NPC. Just a little thing of that NPC not remembering their name or not caring their name or calling them by a different name, 9 out of 10 times you get this immediate hate towards this NPC because we very much hold a name as a sense of self. And if we're playing a character, a name is a sense of character. So when we lose that and we don't have that, or someone doesn't acknowledge it, or someone doesn't care to acknowledge that, we immediately have disdain from them on a subconscious level. Oh, it's wonderful. I love doing it. One of the greatest villains I ever built, that's how he started out with. He was a PC that just did not care about anyone's name. He just called them by identifying trait. You with the long hair, you with the short foot, whatever the case, but we had a person who had a club foot. It was a long story. But it worked amazingly well because that was like the catalyst of everything of why they hated this man so much. And I still hold he was misunderstood. But names hold power. So I use the names, I say, both to antagonize people and to get them to understand and immerse in the world of having that list of random names of I don't have to randomly, pull one out. It doesn't feel like I'm making something from the ether. It's what's the kid's name? One glance down, I have a name. We're good to go. Cannot recommend having a list of random names highly enough. Next little piece of advice here. This actually came from here in the GM Academy. We do every Monday night coffee hours where the DMs get together, we have conversations, and we sort of just kind of workshop. I don't like using that term because we're in a workshop, but we talk about problems people are having and getting ideas and all this. And this is actually one that was presented to me that I loved it so much because it appeals to what I do so much that I had to share it here, and I've been using it. I've only known it for about a month now, but I've been using it to such deliciousness. And what it is for DMs that fudge the dice behind the screen. For if you're in combat and that bad guy gets a critical hit and he's supposed to deal him 23 points of damage and knock out the PC, and it's really not supposed to be that hard of a fight, or maybe they're struggling anyway and you don't really want them to get completely overpowered, or maybe the bad guys are just rolling really good all night. Whatever the case may be, a lot of DMs feel uneasy, not changing the dice. I mean, it's what the dice rolled. It's what the dice god said was supposed to happen, and taking that away changes the experience. Well, what was proposed to me sort of gives peace offerings back to the dice gods, and that is saving that extra damage you roll behind the screen and divvying it out later to them in the campaign. And to me, that tickled every little bit that was me, because I go, I do change it. I do feel bad, but if I dish it out later, the dice gods are still happy. We still have to me, everything's right in the world, but yet I get to move things around just a little bit to still tell the best possible story. So it's a little trick, again, that is not mine, was presented, and I'll give him credit, Pat, one of our guys who attends the coffee hour, a wonderful little piece of advice, and I've been using that in my campaigns, and it's just wonderful. It appeals to everything that's made. Well, I've talked about the first 4, so we're going to jump on out to Patrick. I think some of my other DMs perhaps have maybe 1 or 2 pieces of advice as well. So let's start with you, Patrick. What tips, what do you have for us?
Well, I think the most important tip I can give any DM is the basics, the foundation for any DMing. And I find a lot of novice DMs miss this. And it's when you're DMing, you're working with the players, not against them. And a lot of players, new DMs, think it's, I'm out to get the players and kill them or whatever. And I think, no, it's all about making the players have fun. And if the players aren't having fun, you're not DMing properly.
I think that's a fantastic point. Thank you, Patrick. And like you said, it's a common misconception sort of almost within our, our hobby as a whole, and it still persists to this day. And a lot of new people coming in, it's the DM as the adversary, and especially once you get more into tabletop, once you've played it for a while, you start to learn the most fun that you can have is when everyone's working together, and that adversarial relationship does not work in tabletop. There are board games that do it really, really well. I mean, if you play the Call of Cthulhu board games, or Mansions of Madness, or Betrayer on the House of the Hill, a lot of really good board games do that concept very, very well. The reason it doesn't work in tabletop is because the DM has complete power. There is no equalizing force. In board games, there's established rules. As a DM, I can say, yeah, I'm supposed to run this character, by the way, but nothing's to stop me from throwing a character at you that's 4 levels higher. I can crush you. Crushing is easy. And this is one of the points I'm going to make, and Patrick, such a good point that you made with that, is difficulty within gameplay is easy. No matter what you're doing within game design, which you as a DM, you are designing a game. You have a toolkit, which is your system, but you are designing a game. To create difficulty is easy. It's easier than creating not difficulty. What actual takes skill is creating the appropriate amount of challenge. So a lot of DMs come into it and go, I want to make it really, really challenging for them because then I'm doing a good job as DM. No, you're not. You're taking the easy route, and you're taking the route that will not work long-term in the future. Excellent point, Patrick. I really like that one. So continuing on with mine, let's see. The next one that we have, another thing that I really like to do, and of course you've all have heard me talk about, I like plot. I'm a real narrative-based person. I like telling big, huge, epic stories. I like the Game of Thrones style of we're going to tell a story over years and years and years. But there's always this concern of player fatigue, and that is a very real concern. It happens within story. It happens within tabletop playing. One of the #1 things I do that helps reduce player fatigue is in between my story arcs. So I talked about this in the other workshops. 15 to 20 hours at the game table is a story arc, beginning, middle, conclusion. In between these story arcs, I like to run one-shots, whether it be with the characters, whether it be in a complete different system, whether it be with different characters. I like to run one-shots between these story arcs. And this does a couple different things. One of the big things it does is it gives distance between the story arcs. Because normally I like a little bit of in real-world time to occur. We just completed this story arc. The next one's going to pick up 4 months later in a different part of the Empire, a different part of whatever we're doing. And we talked about this in Time Travel Discovery, events that occur is what make the mind understand the passage of time. So if we do a one-shot in between, it makes us understand in our minds that passage of time more than even if it was just a month between physical real time between tabletop play sessions. The other thing it does is if you allow the players to play different characters, even in perhaps different settings, it refreshes things in their mind. If you get into these big stories where they're playing the same character for 2-3 years, they can get tired of just running the same mechanics. It's especially tiring if you run a rules-heavy system. D&D 4th is very bad for it. Even 3.5 and Pathfinder are the same way. If you are running the same character and the same mechanics every week for 2 years, it just gets stale. It's just part of a natural mentality. So to give them the one-shots and give them the opportunity to play different characters, to do different things, allows it to refresh within their mind. And then the last thing I like to do with these one-shots is I run more serious side of story arcs. I mean, everyone likes comedy. Ha 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 ha. Comedy's wonderful. We all like to laugh. But I tend to run more serious, darker stories, and that need that tone. However, the more you do that, the more you build up comedic tension by being serious. So you need an outlet for it. So I like to do the one-shots that are comedy-based one-shots to let the same characters release that tension, to get it out, to make the horrid jokes that you want to make that aren't appropriate with the story that we're talking about. It gives that outlet, it releases it. I love doing the one-shots in between campaigns. Okay, we're gonna do one more of mine, and then we'll jump over to Simon for one of his. The next one I have another thing I really like to do. Again, if you've DM'd long enough, everyone's ran into this player and this character, and that is the player that wants to make the brooding assassin. They're the character that's going to be, yeah, I'm the quiet guy. I sit in the corner. When action happens, I take care of it. You need me, I'm over here. I'm not emotionally connected to anything. I could care less. I need to be smoking a cigarette, I suppose. And the character seems great. You know, it's the Batman, the Assassin's Creed, the Altair. It just, you see that character in other media that's not tabletop, and you go, that's a cool character. I want to be that, and they play it, but not understanding that tabletop is a social-based game, and what happens is you sit in the corner bored the entire time. So, some people, even being told this, still play these types of characters. So I have a very specific way that I handle these type of players. And that is I make them emotionally attached to something. At that point, this becomes my mission in the campaign. And the favorite one I do, I had an assassin in one of my campaigns, you know, that he was sort of in touch with the underworld. He was dealing with everything like that. And what I did was I picked the 8-year-old flower girl, and she, for some reason, loved the assassin. She would just give him things, give him presents. Then she started giving him information. Then she started giving him magic items. Then she disappeared. Now, not only does he like this person is giving him a tangible mechanical benefit, and he just lost it. Now, guess what? This character is engaged. They care. They're invested. They didn't want to be invested, subconsciously or not. I force that investment upon them, because if you're playing at my table, you're not going to sit in the corner and be quiet. You're not having fun. You're not having my level of fun. You're not having fun with everyone else. Being engaged with something, being involved with something, absolutely, so much more fun. We had a great little mini session that came from that, and I got to use her as leverage for many times in the future. But anyone who is that distant character, that, you know, I don't care about my comrades, I don't care about NPCs, I'm a loner. My goal as a GM is to make them then attached to something. That's what I want them to do. Okay, so let's jump over to Simon now, and let's see. I think you have another piece of advice for everyone as well.
Yes. First of all, I would like to pick up on some of your points, and and I want to like expand them. You said like you do run one shots to like circumvent the player fatigue. Since we are, as dungeon masters and players, are telling a story basically, what I think I tried it out and I really liked it, to actually just to run two different kind of groups within the group. So it's player group A and player group B, and they have different perspective on the story which progresses, and they this way they see what their other characters do to the world, and have like a direct way to see how their actions change the world. So
yeah, and let me just, because I really like that point, and I didn't touch on it more, and I'll let you get right back to it. But no, I want to just expand, because you make a fantastic point, Simon, and I think that is one of the best ways, if you're going to run a one-shot within the same system, is do exactly what you just said. Run it in the same world, in the same timeline, because then you get to show how their characters are affecting the world, and you get to let them do all of the other benefits you get from doing a one-shot, from playing other characters, from being creative, from getting that fatigue, while still enforcing the main story even more. So I just wanted to hammer that, because it's an excellent point, Simon.
yeah, and now for my own point, I guess, is don't over prep as a dungeon master. The best tool as a dungeon master is to improvise. And I would advise every new dungeon master, to not prepare the story, prepare characters. So it is a working kind of fluid story, because players will never ever do what you expect them to do. And if you prepared a certain situation and figured out how this situation will end, it will not work. And so it actually, you will spend your time a lot better if you prepare the character. What are his motivations? What are his like bad habits? This kind of stuff, and how does he stand to other characters? And then you have a working understanding on how the situation will fold out, depending on how the characters will act on it.
Well, wonderful, outstanding point, Simon. And I want to. There's so much within that I really want to delve into. But I'm going to take one specific point out that I think is really important about what you just said, and that is the over preparation. You know, we mentioned earlier when you are designing campaigns that are for a long period of time, when you are designing a 6-month, a year, a 2-year, a 3-year campaign, what I hear, especially from a lot of new DMs, is, okay, here's all the prep work that I've done to lay the groundwork for this massive campaign that I'm going to do. And when I talk to these people and they ask me about that, I go, if I'm being honest, that's the wrong way to do it. Because the thing with over-preparation and the thing with heavy preparation, especially between game sessions, is we talk about player fatigue, you get GM fatigue. At some point, the preparation becomes boring, it becomes a burden, you don't want to do it, and the game suffers. Now, yes, there are people that do heavy preparation and run long campaigns, but if you look at overall, if you talk to enough DMs, what you'll find, the DMs that really have these good long-running sessions do very minimal prep in between sessions, because it keeps it fresh, it keeps them enjoyable, it keeps the DM fatigue from happening. If you are committed to doing, you know, even equal prep time, 4 hours of prep time for every 4 hours at the game table, you are going to burn out. You know, it might be a month, it might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be a year. You are going to burn out. It will happen. The heavy prep is not good for DMing. Some people like it. A small percentage of people can really do it, can really keep doing it, but there are so many stories I hear that they burned out because they got tired with their world and they didn't realize it was the prep. And I said I was going to say one point, but actually the second point I want to say on that, I agree 100%. The easiest way to do what I would call a good amount of prep without taking a lot of time is making good, flushed out characters, NPCs, villains, for them to interact with, just like Simon said, because then it has a great sort of, it's easy, all right, I know this character's motivation, so I can just know that he would do this, this, or this, and I don't have to plan out all of this stuff. Really like that point. Thank you, Simon. So, all right, next one that we get into is, again, another sort of step for helping players engage, and this is really good. I do a lot of work with new players. I run the introductory D&D 4th edition sessions, and this works pretty much regardless, but understand when you're talking at the table, you're setting a precedent for how talk is going to occur at the table. It's a simple concept, but one a lot of people miss. If I'm cutting and carry on jokes and doing Monty Python jokes, as the DM, my players are going to do the same thing. If I only speak to them in character, if they're new, they might be a little bit apprehensive at first, but the more you do it, the more they'll give it back to you. Whatever precedent you set at the table, they're all going to follow you as DM. So one of my rules is there's essentially 3 ways that I talk within play session. There is in character, which is 70 to 80% of the time. If my character is talking, he's talking in character. There is narration, which this is, you know, they walk into the town and I'm giving the basic description of, you know, the high stone walls that have the big opening that in the summer solstice the light comes through. There's the narration, which I don't get into heavy narration, but that occurs as well. And then there is the explanation of rules. And essentially what I have is, despite within these workshops you hear me drone on with the same tone of voice and the same tempo for an hour and drive you crazy, I actually do have different voices and tempos, although I'm not the best voice actor. But I have a certain way that I speak, or different ways I speak when I'm doing NPCs. I have a certain tone that I do all of my narration in, and then when I'm explaining mechanics, you hear me just like this. Okay, what you're trying to do is a charge attack. What you get is, oh, I don't remember the charge attack off the top of my head, but a -1 to your attack roll and a +2 to damage, or whatever the case is. Now I'm back in character. And I separate it out as complete, distinct, and different. We were talking about rules and it's done. Now we're back in character talking the game. And understand that you as the DM, you're going to lead this behavior. They are going to emulate what you do. The #1 thing I hear when people say they're not getting into character, it's because the DM is not getting into character. If you only talk to them in character, Yeah, new players at first are going to go, when the old guy goes, yes, what do you have to sell me? I'm a busy man. I have many things to do. And he ruffles his jingly coin chest, the merchant does. The beginning people are going to go, okay, well, I try and barter with him about this. And then I just go right back to in character. So you're trying to sell me the short sword. I have tons of short swords. What do I need those for? Exotic ones, short ones. I even have long short swords. And as long as I keep engaging in character, they will start engaging in character back to me. My panel's laughing and cracking me up. They will engage in character back to me. It sometimes will take a little bit of time, especially with new players. But if you are in character, they are in character. And at first, if you don't get that response, it's fine. If they are narrating their actions and you're talking character, it's fine. They will start talking character. There's a few things I will guarantee you 100%. If you only talk to them in character, they will start talking back to them in character because it becomes cumbersome for them not to. They want to start naturally answering in first person, and they have to add more words to their sentence not to answer you, and their brain will start telling them you need to start answering in first person. It will happen. That is the number one thing I like to do. If I want to encourage, them role-playing, getting character, I have to do the same thing. Okay, next we get to one of my big ones, and this comes a lot, especially, again, with new players and more complicated systems, and it's what I call the 60-second rule. And what the 60-second rule is if we're playing at a table and there is a mechanics question that I do not know the answer to and the players don't know the answer to, we have to look it up in the book. If we are actively at the play session, we have 60 seconds to find that rule. If we do not find that answer in 60 seconds, I'm going to take my best guess at what it is. We are going to play with that with the acknowledgement that the next time we find a break or at the end of the play session, we will look up and find the rule, and the rule will be that from that point forward. We are not going to stop the flow of events at the game table for longer than 60 seconds to find a mechanic. I do this with systems I barely know. When I started playing L5R, I got the basic idea of how to run it, and we had numerous of these, and we took guesses, and we learned the system through this, and we still had fun. There is nothing more of a joy kill, more of a fun kill, than stopping for 5 to 10 minutes and looking up rules. Rules and the system is a tool to make your game to give them enjoyment. That's the 3-step process. Ultimately, the game is what makes fun, not the tools. The tools are for you to use however you want to. So I am very strong on the 60-second rule. Same thing goes with any sort of rules debate. If there's a question, I think it's this, I think it's that. You all got 60 seconds to work it out, and then GM's making a decision. Or if it's between me and a player, I will hear their argument. I personally, if we're talking about rules debates, I almost always side with players. If I don't know it off the top of my head, if they go, I think it's this, or they tell me I'm wrong, they say this is, I go, okay, you're right, move forward. Because ultimately, that extra +1 or +2 doesn't affect the end of my story and your enjoyment at all. Me arguing with you about it will affect that enjoyment. Now, yes, once we hit a break, the end of the play session, in the week in between play sessions, we're going to look it up and we're going to find out what the actual rule is. But I want to keep gameplay moving forward. Always keep gameplay moving forward. Do not stop it because of rules. That is just putting the cart in front of the horse. Again, tools make game, make enjoyment. Do not let tools get in front of enjoyment. 60-second rule. Cannot emphasize it enough.
I would say on top of...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say on top of that, don't discuss about I have combat advantage or whatever system you're using, and I should have a +2 and there's a -2 because of this and that. Just roll the dice and then figure out if it actually matters, because most often you roll a 20 or whatever the dice you need to roll, and you see if you roll a 1, you don't need to argue about it anymore longer, or if you roll a 20, you don't need to argue about it. Just roll the dice and then you can start arguing, and don't argue as too long as you just said.
Exactly, perfect. And then the other thing you can do, if you want to allow it to keep going, especially if you're doing a more rules-heavy system, a D&D 4th, a 3.5, a Pathfinder, what have you, is if you're in combat, when a lot of the times these rules questions pop up, say, in between, before your turn comes around next, you've got that much time to give me an answer for your next roll. Another perfect example. But the core being, exactly what you said, and what I was getting at, do not allow it to stop gameplay. Get it moving forward, because ultimately there's little pluses or minuses. They're just getting in the way of fun. And as a DM, I always side with the players, because they will always be fine if you give them the extra bonus that they think they're getting. They will not always, but more often than not, be unhappy if you take that away, unless you can point to them in black and white, here's why it's happening or not happening. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Another thing I like to do is, and we actually touched on this earlier, point that Simon made about building a pool of NPCs. I actually keep a list of fully fleshed out characters that are not part of the campaign sitting right underneath my pile of random names. And that way, when they inevitably get invested with a character that was never supposed to be relevant, I don't have to stop and make a whole bunch of stuff about them. I just go, all right, here's stock 8-year-old child number 3. Here's my character sheet for him. And I will say this, I play a lot of systems, again, Legend of Five Rings, that is very much dependent on players and NPCs all have the identical character sheets. While that is clearly not true in a lot of systems, for other type systems I run, I will look at, if it's D&D 4th, I'll look at the monster manual and I'll write down whatever the relevant stuff is. If PC character sheet applies, I'll write that up. But I will have a list of random characters so that way I can pull them out. A lot of you have heard me say over and over again, I do not like random characters, and I do not use these to interject random character into story. What I use these is to quickly fill in the blanks when PCs have decided to bring someone into their story. I don't have to break that immersion. I immediately have a name for the character. I immediately have a character sheet. We're good to go, and we can roll just like it was planned from the beginning. And that's what I use my random pool of NPCs for. I don't generally, again, throw, all right, you're going to run into miscellaneous character number 3. I don't use it for that. Again, not saying there's necessarily an issue with it. I just personally am down on the side of I don't do a lot of random encounter type deals, but having that random pile allows you to very quickly adapt. Again, if you know what the captain of the guard who they're supposed to deal with, you know what he's going to be and all of his stats and his unique abilities, but all of a sudden they're interested with the guy who keeps the locks to the prison cells because whatever reason, I can quickly pull out, here's guard archetype F, let's roll with him. And I've got the stats I need. So again, something that I really like doing. Another thing, when we're talking about NPCs and we're talking about rules and everything like this, boss fights. This applies a lot more, not nearly as much new players, but very much some experienced players you get with, especially when you get with challenge players and people who have DM'd themselves. And that is once they have a good, strong understanding of the monster manual or the NPC list, and they go, oh, I'm going up against a beholder. I know it does this, 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 and has this, this, and this weakness. So when I do boss fights, what I love to do, especially if I got one of these players in the group, is I take one of their archetype monsters, and then I change all the stats and I change all the powers around. And when they tell me, well, a beholder doesn't have that power, I go, it's my game. That's a tool. Read the beginning of every single monster manual, every single NPC list ever made. It says these are options and suggestions, and the DM has the right to change them. Every single book in our hobby that's printed has some verbiage that's similar to that if we get down to an argument in black and white. For boss fights, I always change it. And the reason being because there is nothing that's worse than them saying, here's what we have to do to beat it. There is nothing better than them saying, here's what we have to do to beat it, and then being wrong. Oh, it's phenomenal. When they just know this thing is weak to ice, and they use the ice attacks and it's immune. There is nothing better than that because what they're doing is they are using meta-knowledge to make in-character decisions. They should not be doing that. They know they should not be doing that. We know they should not be doing that. And it gets into my next point of attacking meta-knowledge. And I use strong language here. I am 100% for actually attacking player meta-knowledge. So similar to like the boss things, what I will do is say things accidentally on a meta level that aren't true. Yeah, it's not a nice thing to do, I suppose, but it works very well. And to give you an example, I did this once actually in a dungeon crawl or a mini dungeon crawl. They entered whatever the next room. They had a couple different options, and they went to the next room. And I sort of flipped through sheets and I go, and you encounter the blue dragon. No, wait, I'm sorry. And then went, no, you're in this room. And now the whole time they're sitting there going, there's a blue dragon in here. There was no blue dragon. I made it up. It didn't exist. And the reason I did that is because in character, they shouldn't act on that. They should not act on meta-knowledge. So I actively do things to make my players not trust anything I don't say in character. And it goes back to that whole thing. I would never break that trust of what a character says they believe is true or they're intentionally lying to you or what have you. What is meta-knowledge, what is written down in my papers, what I say during the breaks, that, if you are using that actively in your campaign or in a campaign with me, you are going to be gravely mistaken. And it's because I just want to break down that entire behavior. I don't want players acting with meta-knowledge because it's not as fun. It's a basic human desire to want to win, to use the tools that you have and any information that they know to try and win. So if they have it, they'll try and do it, even if it's on a subconscious level. You know, everyone knows this who's been DMing for a fair period of time. It is almost impossible to tell a character or to have a player know something and have them not have their character immediately know that. The best way to resolve that is give enough disinformation and meta-knowledge to make what is true information useless because you can't discern between the two. So I actively, and again, this is not going to be for everyone, but I actively what I call attack meta-knowledge. Okay, Stephen is the one we haven't heard from yet, so let's get a piece of advice here from you, Stephen. If I haven't named off too many of them, I hope I didn't step on. What do you got for us?
All right, I forgot to turn on the microphone. Well, I think one of the most important things, even before you start playing, is making sure that everyone agree on all the stuff that has to do with the game. Like you could, for example, ask people about how they rate the 8 kinds of fun that you've been talking about. And you can do other things, but the most important thing is that you talk to them and you figure out what kind of game they want to play. Say 2 players that have generally the same 8 kinds of fun rated equally, but they could want a game that's completely different from each other even then. Like some guy might want to play an evil party, and all the other guys want to play a good party. So yeah, I would maybe make sure that everyone kind of agrees on what they want, because if you have clashing opinions about what's fun, you're going to run into problems down the line.
And that's a fantastic point, and it's something that not enough DMs do. And thank you for bringing that up, Stephen. Communication. Communication is one of the biggest things. It's one of the biggest concepts that as a DM we really need to do, and especially prior to the very first play session. You know, everyone sort of has different things, and we'll be doing a workshop at some point in the future on sort of what you do before session 1 as far as different ways to vet players, different things that you can do. But one of the important things is once you know who you are going to be playing with, who you're going to be designing a campaign for, that everyone's on the same page for the same experience. You know, again, there's vastly different experiences from one play system to another, and vastly different experiences within the same system. To give a good idea, Stephen, what you're talking about, you know, if you go, all right, well, I want to get, you know, a good bunch of players together. You know, it's going to be nice. It's going to be role play heavy, so I want to get my role play heavy. I do my 8 kinds of fun. I do all of this. You know, and then once I've selected my players who are going to play at the table with me, you know, I send out the, you know, whatever, we're going to play the Star Wars tabletop, and all of a sudden one of your players comes back and goes, I'm dropping out. I have no interest. And you go back to him and go, well, what's the issue? And he goes, I don't like sci-fi at all. I just do fantasy. And this is a real life thing that has happened of he was heavy into role play. He was heavy into everything else, leading up to that. But there had been no discussion because in the GM's mind, it was, well, we're playing tabletop. What, to me, what difference does it make if the genre's fantasy or sci-fi? We're having tabletop. He knew the guy liked Star Wars, but in actuality, the guy had no interest at all in doing any kind of sci-fi-based role playing, and he dropped out of the campaign. And there was an issue because of it, and it's for exactly the reasons that you said, Stephen. There was not the proper communication between DMs and players, especially leading up to Session 0. And further than just Session 0, throughout the campaign. You think of all of the hundreds of different individual points I've made over the workshops and the thousands more I'm going to make as this series continues. And as a DM, you have all of this stuff rattling around in your head. You've got all of these different concepts that you're trying to balance and make people happy and make a story and engage the kind of fun, and your brain's running a mile a minute. Sometimes you forget to ask your players how things are going, what's happening, how much enjoyment they're having. And it's such a crucial part, because even if you think you're running everything perfectly, if you do not have that open dialogue, it becomes issues. Communication is the #1 thing that prevents issues between people. Cannot emphasize enough. Stephen has an outstanding point. Okay, the two last points that I have here. One's going to be, and this is something I personally like to do. Again, this isn't going to be something for everybody, but it's something that I like to do. And that is when I start a campaign, especially before Session 0, and frequently in between sort of my individual story arcs, I give players different information. Not information that's wrong. I give them each a different piece of the puzzle. So to give an example, when we started my L5R campaign, they don't have to know that much about the world, but what happened was we had 3 players that were sent to go help what are essentially the police investigate missing jade petal tea. It's a magical tea is all you need to know. And they were going to investigate this missing shipment. And what we had was one player knew that this shipment actually was not jade petal tea, but it was an artifact going from one of the clans to the others. And it was a secret, and his job was to recover it before anyone realized that the documents were forged and it was actually an artifact. One of the other players knew that there was a suspected NPC in the group, or in the environment, who had gotten in trouble with the Imperial lineage in the last couple months and had disappeared to this region. So he knew that piece of the puzzle. And then the third person knew that there was this ongoing war between the local leader and one of the smaller clans, and that local leader was looking for any excuse to invade it, and that his boss suspected that the local leader had formulated this whole plot as a reason to attack the other people. So each of the PCs have their own little piece of information of the world and are completely unaware of everyone else. This works really, really well, especially if you're doing internet or Roll20 playing where everyone's not a big social group that gets together and talks afterwards. But giving them these little secrets, especially if it has to be a secret, will have players get a little tiny bit of friction between them, because they'll start seeing the other players doing something that doesn't add up to the information that they have. And the other player will get to engage and sort of revel in the secret that they have. And I actually present it to people as, this is a secret. This is me and you know this one piece. And a lot of times, as surprising as it sounds, they don't put together that everyone else is also getting a little piece until they're at the table playing it out, and you get to engage that discovery type of fun. It's outstanding. It has to be managed properly because, again, it is designed to give a little bit of friction between players, PCs. Not a lot, not enough to get them to go to kill each other, but just a little bit of friction in that they'll want to start doing things a little bit differently than each other. So it's one of the things I like. The last point that I want to make, and this is a huge one. This is one that I would dare say 90% of GMs have not considered, and that is understanding why you GM and what you are trying to accomplish. Now, there is a go-to answer within our hobby, and that is rule number 0, have fun. And of course, I've already taken rule 0 and said, well, you can't just tell me have fun, you got to tell me which of the 8 kinds of fun you're having. But I'm going to take it a step further in that, how do you want to objectively judge how good of a job you've done? With everything else, with plot, with combat encounters, we say, do this, do this, do this. Here are ways to make it fun, to make it enjoyable. You can kind of sense when people are having fun. But how are you objectively judging how good of a job you are doing as DM? And it's something you're going to have to consider within your own mind, because different people are going to have wildly different objectives. Do you consider that you've done a good job as a DM if you have kept your group together for 6 months? That might be your benchmark goal. Do you consider, your benchmark goal is if my players are actively talking about the game and the plot in between play sessions? I've done a great job as DM if I do that. Do you do it if everyone seems to have fun every week at the table? Understand what your benchmark goal is for, as a GM, what your terms of success are. And understand you're going to succeed sometimes and you're going to fail sometimes. Both of those are good. But if you don't have a benchmark for what you are trying to accomplish, how can you ever say whether you're doing a good job or not? Yeah, nice dark note to end it on. Let me tell you my personal one. Here's what I'm trying to do as a DM at a table. My ultimate goal is that I have a play session where I go and the play session begins, and then I shut my mouth and my PCs talk in character about relevant information for 4 hours where I say absolutely nothing, and at the end I go and conclude play session. It's impossible to actually have that play session, but to me, that is the highest possible level of character engagement, and everything I'm going for is PC character engagement in story and expression. To me, that's what I'm going for. So what do I judge myself every week by? How much time the PC spent talking in character versus how much time I had to do things at GM. The higher that ratio, the better I did as a GM. Again, complete personal goal. Not everyone's going to have that same goal, but the one big trick that I really want to hammer is understand to have a goal, to have an objective, maybe more than one, maybe different ones, but to have an objective way that you can go, did I do a good job, did I not do a good job? Because what you're going to find is once you understand, okay, I didn't do a good job, my PCs weren't engaged this week, then you got to go back and say, what did I do? What did I not do? What did I miss? I need to understand that. If I'm just wading through the waters, yeah, sure, 70-80% of the time you're going to have a great play session. Players are going to love it. You're going to have a good campaign, everything. If you want to get to that higher level, and this is one of the last point I want to make, that rule 0, that have fun, I find that a dangerous rule. And I'll tell you why. Because rule 0, have fun, if you're having fun, it's all good, is complacency. It means you are fine as a GM saying, we did good, we were happy, it's awesome. I'm here to tell you no, especially if you've sat through an hour video listening to me, if you sit through the other videos I had, you can have more fun. You can have better fun. You can not just take we had fun as good, you want that higher level of engagement. Again, when we take it to a different media, there are plenty of books in the fantasy genre that people have read and go, that's an enjoyable book. And then there's George R.R. Martin in Game of Thrones. Are you just happy making something enjoyable? Fine, go do it. Have fun. If you're sitting here watching our workshops on how to be a GM, how to get better, and you think that's good enough, I would strongly have you reconsider, because there's so much more you can do if you just keep pushing yourself, just as a player, as a GM, pushing yourself to make it better and more fun. You will hit levels of enjoyment from this that are unparalleled in any other media. The level of engagement that we have within tabletop, and I'm going to say it, is better than other forms of media. And once you start engaging more in that, you can really open up and see what this hobby's about. So real quick, after the big hammer here dropped at the end, did anyone have any last questions here about any of the ones we talked about? Any sort of last points that they wanted to make on anything?
Yeah, I got one thing to add, about a
Sure.
point added earlier on, when you were saying one way to make an NPC or players dislike an NPC is by making the NPC mispronounce their name or not pay the PCs enough attention. I think the flip side can be almost as effective, or if not more, and that PCs are going to really connect and enjoy an NPC that is a fan of their characters, that really likes their characters and really is happy about when they complete things and get things done. I found this works really well in my campaign.
Oh yeah, fantastic point. Absolutely. If you want a great way, like you said, Patrick, to get PCs to engage, you know, and to like NPCs, is to have the NPCs like them. It's a real simple concept. If they are talking about how great these, you know, these traveling warriors were that came through and saved us from the goblins, and they're telling everyone to Ken and throwing down roses and giving them free hotel rooms, and you know, talking about how great they are, they're going to love that NPC. It's a great strategy, and then it's, of course, emotional manipulation to be used against them for part of the campaign later on. Ha ha ha, because we're talking dark here at the end. But no, it's a fantastic and great point, Patrick. All right, we're at the end of our hour. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. As always, we do these workshops every 2 weeks. The next one coming up is big. I mean big, big. We are going to do something that has not been done, that I've ever seen done in the tabletop world before, so I'm really excited for it. So check us out. Of course, we have our active group on Roll20, the Roll20 GM Academy, where you get all this wonderful information. Check out our Twitter. Check out our Facebook. For those of you who watch this video, please post your tips and tricks down in the comments, again, wherever those things appear on YouTube, just so that we can see yours, because there are tons and tons of them out there. I didn't even quite get through all the ones I had. As always, it has been a pleasure, and I will see you all at the table.